My name is Jack Brennan. I'm 56 years old, born and raised in the hill country outside Austin, Texas. 22 years as a paramedic left me with 2 titanium knees, a back that predicts rain better than the weather app, and the ability to stay ice calm when everything around me is on fire. I thought those skills would carry me gently into retirement on the 8-acre ranch my Uncle Ray left me when he passed in 2022. 8 acres of post oak and cedar, a low-slung limestone house built in 1978, solar panels I installed myself, a dozen laying hens, and a steel barn where I rebuild old motorcycles because the smell of cutting oil keeps the ghosts quiet. I was wrong about gentle. The trouble started the day I came home from a week in Montana visiting my daughter Claire and her new baby. I turned off the county road expecting the familiar crunch of gravel under my tires, and instead found a U-Haul backed up to my porch and a woman in a navy blazer directing traffic like an air traffic controller on cocaine. Margaret Peggy Whitaker, 51 years old, bottle blonde, voice like a filing cabinet, and president of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association for the last 5 years. She had sold my ranch while I was gone. Not foreclosed in the normal sense, sold. To a pleasant young couple from Dallas named Harrison who thought they were buying a steal at $89,000 cash. Peggy stood on my own porch holding a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. She smiled the way a cat smiles at a half-dead mouse and handed the deputy a stack of certified mail receipts, published auction notices, and a deed transfer with what looked exactly like my signature scrawled across the bottom. The deputy, a kid named Torres who still had academy polish on his boots, gave me the apologetic shrug I'd given 100 families when I had to tell them their loved one didn't make it. "Sir, I'm sorry, but this is private property now. You're going to have to leave." I stood in the driveway I had shoveled snow off for 20 Texas winters holding a duffel bag and a bag of Claire's homemade oatmeal cookies. Watching strangers carry a faux leather sectional through the front door my uncle hung with his own hands in 1987. That was the moment something inside me switched off and something else switched on. People who have never lived under a malignant HOA think it's about Christmas lights up past January 5th or mailboxes that don't match the approved Sherwin-Williams color chart. Peggy Whitaker turned it into an occupation. In 5 years, she took annual dues from $200 to $920, ballooned the covenant book from 12 pages to 51, and developed a personal hobby of walking the neighborhood with a clipboard and a 30-foot tape measure looking for sins. If your St. Augustine was half an inch too high, $200 fine. If your grandkid's plastic playhouse was visible from the street, $500. If you fought her, the fines compounded daily until the lien on your house was bigger than your mortgage, and she could foreclose for non-payment of assessments. 3 families had already disappeared before me. The Garcias, the Nguyen's, and old Dr. Patel who moved to a senior apartment in San Antonio rather than keep paying Peggy's architectural noncompliance fees. I just hadn't connected the dots yet. That first night, I slept in my pickup outside the Moto Guzzi shop on Highway 71 because every motel within 30 miles was booked for South by Southwest. I spread Peggy's photocopies across the steering wheel under the dome light and studied the forged signature until the letters swam. My normal handwriting slopes right and hurries. The muscle memory of a man develops writing run reports at 3 a.m. after a cardiac arrest. The signature on the deed was perfect, careful, upright. Someone had practiced. I folded the papers, tucked them behind the visor, and made myself 2 promises. 1, I would not lose my temper in public. 2, I would not lose everything else if that's what it took to burn Peggy Whitaker's little empire to the ground. The next 3 weeks were graduate school in Texas property law, HOA covenants, and environmental statutes. I lived on bad coffee and the free popcorn at the county law library in Georgetown. The librarian started saving me the corner corral and bringing me refills without being asked. That's where I learned about the super lien and the hidden clause on page 43 of our 1988 covenants that let the association foreclose in 60 days if you were chronically delinquent and non-compliant. Peggy had been building that paper trail on me for 18 months. Solar panels that suddenly violated architectural standards, a chicken coop classified as commercial agriculture, my workshop labeled an unpermitted commercial enterprise. Each citation was technically defensible enough to survive a challenge from someone who couldn't afford a $5,000 retainer. She never counted on a retired paramedic with nothing left to lose and a stubborn streak wider than the Colorado River. The deeper I dug, the uglier it got. Peggy's own quarter-acre lot at the end of Mockingbird Lane used to be a Conoco station. Underground tanks removed in 1991, but the soil tests were conveniently inconclusive. The county had been trying to force proper sampling for 6 years. Every time an inspector showed up, Peggy's lawyer filed another motion claiming the county lacked jurisdiction. Meanwhile, she owed $3,200 in unpaid environmental assessments and had ignored every notice. Then came the gift from God in the form of an 81-year-old widow named Dorothy McAllister. Dorothy's husband Bill had been county clerk from 1974 to 2004 and never threw anything away. After Bill passed, Dorothy kept his files in apple boxes in the attic because throwing out county records felt like a sin. One afternoon, she found me in the library asleep on a stack of Texas property code books with drool on my cheek. She tapped me awake, pressed a styrofoam cup of coffee into my hand, and said, "Young man, I think you need to see what my Bill collected on that awful woman." She brought the boxes down one at a time. Inside were time-stamped photographs of Peggy in the middle of the night burying 55-gallon drums of construction waste behind her garage, lab reports from a private firm that showed benzene at 2,000 parts per billion when the safe limit is 5, and a chain of emails between Peggy and a shady environmental consultant offering to make the numbers manageable for 10 grand cash. Bill had even recorded the license plate of the backhoe Peggy rented. Dorothy's eyes were steady when she closed the last box. Bill always said sunlight was the best disinfectant. I think it's time we opened the curtains. I made pristine copies of everything, put the originals in a safe deposit box, and drove straight to the EPA regional office in downtown Dallas. I walked in wearing my least threatening smile, the one I used on combative drunks, and asked for the Criminal Investigations Division. 4 hours later, I walked out with a case number and a promise that someone would call me. They called the next morning at 5:47. By 10 a.m., the street in front of Peggy's house looked like a sci-fi movie. White EPA Suburbans, guys in Tyvek moon suits, core sampling rigs, yellow tape flapping in the breeze. The air smelled like a busted gas pump. Neighbors came out in bathrobes holding coffee cups, trying to understand why federal agents were turning Peggy's prize-winning zoysia lawn into Swiss cheese. Preliminary results hit the next day. Benzene 47 times the action level. TPH, total petroleum hydrocarbons, off the charts. A plume migrating under 9 adjoining properties, including every inch of the 8 acres that used to be mine. The regional director classified it an imminent and substantial endangerment. Translation: Peggy had 48 hours to vacate before the house was sealed indefinitely. I borrowed Dorothy's Buick so Peggy wouldn't recognize my truck and parked 2 houses down with a thermos of coffee and a bag of collages. I watched her load 1 suitcase and a cat carrier into the back of her Camry, while a federal marshal stood on the porch holding a clipboard. She looked smaller without the blazer and the clipboard of her own. The condemned property auction was set for the following Friday on the courthouse steps. Starting bid, $500. The only other bidders were a scrap dealer who thought he could pull the copper plumbing and an environmental cleanup company hoping to flip the remediation contract. I had sold everything that wasn't nailed down, my 1976 shovel head, the vintage Airstream I was restoring, even my late wife's china that had been gathering dust since 2019. Dorothy wrote me a check for 7 grand from Bill's old savings bonds and told me to finish it. I bought Peggy Whitaker's Poison Paradise for $6,200 cash money. The clerk stamped the deed and handed it to me like he was passing the Olympic torch. Here is the part people still refuse to believe until I show them the survey plat. When the subdivision was platted in 1988, the developer saved a few bucks by running the only road, Mockingbird Lane, as a private drive that dead ends at the old Conoco station. Every house in the cul-de-sac, 12 families total, uses that strip of asphalt to get to the county road. When I became the owner of Lot 14B, I became the owner of the only way in or out. Saturday morning, I paid a welding crew triple overtime to install a logging chain and a 10-foot cattle gate with a hardened padlock. By Saturday afternoon, Peggy came home from her new job stocking shelves at the Walmart on 183 and discovered she now lived in a maximum security neighborhood where I held the only key. She called the sheriff's office in hysterics. Deputy Torres, the same kid who had removed me from my ranch, showed up, looked at the plat, looked at the deed, looked at me leaning against my old Ford with my arms folded, and told Peggy there was nothing he could do. Private road, private gate, private property rights. Have a nice day, ma'am. I swear the temperature dropped 10 degrees when she realized what had happened. 3 days later, the EPA issued an emergency order vacating the foreclosure sale of my ranch. Reason: material non-disclosure of known environmental contamination that reduced the property value by more than 60%. Criminal fraud. The Harrisons got relocated to a nice rental in Round Rock, with full moving expenses paid by Uncle Sam. I got the keys to my own front door back before the week was out. The hens squawked like they'd seen a ghost when I walked into the coop. I told them the ghost had been exorcised. Peggy lasted 6 weeks, sending increasingly desperate emails begging for reasonable access. I answered each one with the same form letter: written request on association letterhead, 24 hours advance notice, state destination, and expected return time, no guaranteed approval. She missed 2 probation appointments and 1 court date because I was out of town. The judge revoked her bond and issued a bench warrant. Last I heard, Margaret Whitaker is federal inmate number 48,721-177 at FMC Carswell, serving 8 years for environmental crimes, mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Her real estate license is revoked for life. Her bank accounts are frozen, and the only asset left is a 2009 Camry with a dented fender from the day she tried to ram my gate. The county eventually condemned her lot permanently, cleaned it up with federal money, and turned it into a neighborhood park with a plaque that reads, "Dedicated to the memory of Bill and Dorothy McAllister, who believed sunshine was the best disinfectant." I sold the gate for scrap and bought Dorothy a new tin roof and a lift chair so she can watch the sunset from her porch without pain. Some evenings I still sit on my own porch with a glass of bourbon and watch the same sun slide behind the same cedar trees my uncle planted in 1982. I think about picking up the phone just to ask Peggy how property rights feel from the other side of a locked gate, but I never do. There are some conversations that don't need words. So that is the story of how one retired Texas paramedic used a toxic waste dump and 40-year-old survey plat to take down the worst HOA president the state has ever seen. Now I want to hear from you in the comments. When somebody weaponizes the law to steal everything you own, how far is too far to go to get it back? Is there a clean line between justice and vengeance? Or does the line move depending on who's holding the deed? Some of you will say, I went too far. Some of you will say, I didn't go far enough. I'm genuinely curious where you draw it, because I'm still not sure where I do. Drop your thoughts below. Be honest. Be respectful. I read every single one.